welcome to today's episode of the Balanced Approach podcast. I'm your host, Louis Padian. I hope that you're doing well and are enjoying the podcast and the topics we've covered so far. These podcasts are released every Monday, Wednesday and Friday, so be sure to subscribe wherever you are listening to be kept up to date. So today we will be continuing the carbohydrate mini-series, which I hope you're enjoying so far. We'll be mainly focusing on the key question of, do carbs cause weight gain or do they play a role in weight gain and weight loss? And there's a bit of nuance to this, so I'm actually really excited and looking forward to explaining to you so you can understand actually if carbs are causing your weight gain or if they're helping with your weight loss. So often when we hear people, or especially when I've spoken to people in the past who want to lose weight or improve their health, and by doing so help improving their diet, they will cut out carbs because carbs are seen as the devil, common villains, that they cause weight gain, and things like bread and pasta are often sort of thrown in the mix, or potatoes. So let's dive in, and you're probably familiar with this scenario, that people who cut out carbs on their diet within the first week or two will lose quite a lot of weight quite quickly, and it can be really motivating, and it's often a ploy used by a lot of coaches, and it's not something that I've used in the past, but often some coaches will use it as a ploy by, if you drop in someone's carbs, their weight on the scale will drop really quickly. They will feel really motivated as a consequence, but they'll also feel potentially less bloated, less sluggish, etc., and full of more energy. However, that weight loss isn't necessarily fat loss. So when people are saying they want to lose weight, they usually talk about reducing their body fat, which is very different, or isn't always in line with actually losing body fat that we can just reduce to a number on the scale. So when you eat carbohydrates, it's digested, absorbed as glucose, the real simple sugar that we spoke about before, and a large portion of that will be stored in your muscles, as people might refer to as glycogen, something that you probably heard before, which just means multiple glucose altogether. And you might be thinking, Louis, why is this important? Well, what if I told you that for every 1 gram of glycogen, we absorb 4 grams of water? Now, why is that important? So this is important, especially when we're cutting out carbs or increasing carbs, is that if we cut them out, if we're cutting out bread, pasta, which probably plays quite a large predominant role in a lot of people's diets anyway, we're taking a huge amount of carbohydrate sources away, which means our glycogen stores are probably not getting topped up, which means as our glycogen stores reduce, so does that water. So actually, when people are cutting out carbohydrates, that initial drop will be a lot of water weight, and as soon as they start eating normal again, as soon as they increase their carbohydrate intake, they will regain some of that weight and potentially feel more negative about that. They will feel that themselves down, when actually it's just that water retention or their fluid balance changing within their body. You'll see this, and you'll probably notice this or heard of this in sporting environments. So in weight making sports such as combat sports, weightlifting, where people have got to weigh in a certain time before their event, they may cut carbohydrates temporarily before they actually have to jump on the scales, maybe 24 hours before, and that will help them lose weight on the scale but not necessarily lose muscle mass or body fat, because body fat takes a lot longer to reduce rather than our glycogen stores sort of dropping off. And then they'll refeed on very simple, quickly absorbed carbohydrates before that event. You might also have seen it in people who drink electrolyte drinks when they're dehydrated, such as endurance athletes. One of the benefits of carbohydrates, as it helps with fluid absorption, that alongside salts in that sort of Lucozade or a Gatorade or a Powerade, whatever you want to call it, they have a salt and carbohydrate mix which helps us absorb more water than actually us just drinking water normally would. So that's a real benefit as well. So our body weight can be manipulated massively by just adjusting our carbohydrate intake, and not necessarily change or have an impact on the amount of body fat that we're losing. So hopefully that's shown you sort of those quick tricks behind the scenes that people might try and play on you, or you might see before and after photos where someone's made incredible progress in the first 7 days, and it's essentially just cutting carbohydrates. Going really low carbohydrate can make you look really lean as well. Bodybuilders use this as well when they're getting on stage, that they will probably have a lot of simple carbohydrates before they go on, because actually it makes your muscles look really full because they look really big, and can really help with that look if they're competing in a bodybuilding competition. So let's get back to carbohydrates and weight loss. So we've covered all the theory so far and the physiology, but how does it actually play out in real life? And there'll be people who seem like they know quite a lot who say carbs cause weight gain because carbs cause our insulin to increase. Insulin is a storage hormone. It causes our body to store body fat, and therefore carbs get stored as body fat. And this was made popular by a lot of people, mainly sort of Gary Taubes or Professor Ludwig. It's called the carbohydrate insulin model of obesity, and it's sort of the reason why they blamed carbohydrates, saying if you look at the trends, which actually we'll dig into in a second, as carbohydrates have increased in people's diets, as people have had more processed foods such that contain more sugars, their weights increase, our BMIs have increased, our obesity rates have increased. And actually, you might have heard of the Atkins diet or the Banting diet, which is a very low carbohydrate diet. And that was actually, funny enough, popularized by a professor called Tim Noakes, who was actually a revolutionary sports physiologist in nutrition, actually found and looked into the initial benefits of carbohydrates during endurance performance. Amazing physiologist in the original and back in the day, but actually has gone completely off the wagon and has gone into sort of a very low carb camp and sort of discredited a lot of the original work. It's very messy. So actually, if we have a look into it, there is a few issues with this theory of carbohydrates being linked to insulin and that causing obesity. So there's 4 things that I've picked out after doing a bit of research and also learning a lot from really key researchers in this field. So the first one is that there's no clear relationship between carbohydrate intake and obesity. And actually, when you look at it as well, there's loads of meta-analysis, 2015 meta-analysis of 20 randomized control studies. So they've observed 20 studies that are very similar in the way they're conducted of low carb versus high carb diets for weight loss, and found that actually there was no difference, and there was no significant difference between levels of weight loss between diets in the long term. If we have a look at some examples, so if carbohydrates cause obesity or cause us to gain weight, then if we looked at national diets or population diets, people who eat the highest amount of carbohydrates in their diet would probably have the highest level or rates of obesity. So actually having a look at this, if we took Japan, for example, which has the highest intake of carbohydrates in the developed world, and carbohydrates account for 68% of their total calorie intake, Japan has one of the lowest rates of obesity in the developed world of 21% of the population. So when we compare that to other countries, when we're looking at their carbohydrate or what percentage of their calorie intake comes from carbohydrates, South Korea 67% with only 23% of obesity, China 65% with only 24% of population obese, Taiwan 65% again with only 25% of the population is obese. And we flip that on a head, the UK has only 53% of our calories coming from carbohydrates, but actually higher rates of obesity at 28%. The US has 51% of their calories coming from carbohydrates, with almost 42% of the population being obese. So those numbers don't quite match up, because people who are eating more carbohydrates or more populations that are having more carbohydrates in their diet having lower rates of obesity. So another thing that actually limits this theory, so when people are trying to persuade you that carbs are the problem, the model doesn't actually explain why obesity rates have increased. So if we look at the statistics, the United States has remained relatively stable with its obesity, with its levels of carbohydrate intake, which is around 50%, currently at 51%. However, obesity rates have gone from 23% in 1990 to almost 42% in 2021. So that's a huge increase with no real increase in their carbohydrate intake. The UK, again, has been stable with their percent of their calories coming from carbohydrates, which is around 53%. And again, we've seen huge jumps in our obesity rates from 23% to 28% over a similar period. So again, there's no real correlation there with carbohydrate intake not really increasing over a long period, but obesity rates are increasing. Third problem is that there's no real evidence that actually insulin levels are elevated in all obese people, which you'd expect that if that insulin is the key factor in causing us to gain weight, then everyone who is obese would have elevated insulin levels. And whilst insulin levels are generally higher in obese people than they are in lean people, and this is from a 2015 meta-analysis of 21 studies, there is a wide range of insulin levels among obese people, and actually found that not all obese people have elevated insulin levels as well. So another study from 2018 found over 4,000 people in the United States had about 50% of the obese people had elevated insulin levels. So actually half of the people who are obese didn't have elevated insulin levels. And lastly, as I've probably delved into before, low carbohydrate diets have not been shown to be more effective for weight loss than other diets that we've previously discussed. So it's really important to question some of these narratives around, and they sound really complex and they sound really convincing around, well, if you eat more carbohydrates, your insulin is going to be increased, which is a fat storage hormone, and therefore, but it's a very simplistic way to look at a very complex system. And as we looked at the research, if you've listened to my other podcast, if you haven't, I'd please recommend that you do, because you'll be more informed with the information of how to have a healthier and happier life in regards to your nutrition, training, and lifestyle choices. That actually it's calories dictate sort of weight trends. Yes, we want to have a look at diet quality, and we'll talk about that in a lot more in the next episode around carbohydrate choices. But actually, the amount of carbohydrates in your diet, whether you're high, medium, or low, won't really have any impact or meaningful impact on your progress if calories are the same across the board. So being equipped with that knowledge that actually insulin doesn't drive obesity, that carbohydrates don't really decide whether you're going to be losing weight, that people who eat more carbohydrates don't have high levels of obesity, and that actually we can see these trends over time and pick apart these arguments. So there's a real powerful sort of message behind this podcast and this episode in particular, that carbohydrates shouldn't be feared when it comes to weight loss. It's very individual, it's very down to your preference, your values, and your goals, which we'll discuss a lot more in the next episode. But I really wanted to sort of debunk the myth that carbs cause weight gain and stop people needlessly cutting them out, especially foods that they potentially enjoy. Yes, we might want to sort of measure, monitor, and manage those carbohydrate sources because they may be linking up into a reason that we're eating more calories than we want to, but they shouldn't be feared. They shouldn't be seen as the devil. And actually, they can be included within a very healthy and balanced approach to your nutrition and your health goals, whether that be weight loss, performance, or just general happiness long term. So there you have it. Thank you very much for listening to today's episode of the Balanced Approach podcast. If you have any questions, queries, or would like to reach out to me, please do. I am at Louis Padian Nutrition, which is at LOUISPADIAN Nutrition on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and all other social media platforms. If you're looking for support in achieving your goals and living a healthier, happier, and more balanced life in the process, click the link below and inquire about working with me. Remember to subscribe to the Balanced Approach podcast wherever you're listening for more insightful episodes, and I look forward to speaking to you soon.